Welcome everyone to our webinar. We're just going to give another minute or two for some attendees to join in, and then we're going to get right on with the discussion. Appreciate your patience. We'll be right back. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Good morning to those joining from North America, and good afternoon to those joining from Europe. It has been very exciting to see registrations from so many regions, as it was one of our most important objectives to present a multi-regional perspective on the effects of the pandemic on our industry, clinical monitoring specifically, and bring together professionals from different regions to share their perspectives. I'm Elias Sayas, founder and CEO of ILIKOS Drug Development Solutions, a consulting company based in Cyprus, focused on providing clinical research solutions in support of translational proof of concept studies. Our purpose is to promote positive drug development outcomes by connecting companies such as academic spin-offs, startups, emerging biotechs, and pharma companies to the solutions that best fit their needs. So our model is very much built on a tailored, adaptive, and financially wise approach for our clients. We are very excited to sponsor this webinar. It's actually our first one, and very, very pleased to bring together 4 highly experienced clinical research professionals within our network to share perspective on the impact of COVID-19 on their specific regions, as well as their day-to-day monitoring and study support activities. It is known that in Europe, mainly, the role of clinical monitor takes a much broader description than what we're accustomed to in North America, and I learned that quite recently as well. So our panelists are based in Spain, Germany, Israel, and South Africa. So that gives us a very interesting coverage over a large region. And as you'll come to realize, the realities when it comes to the pandemic were quite different. So that's what's really interesting and exciting to me as a discussion today. The webinar will take place in a Q&A format. We have put together relevant questions and discussion items that we will address together in an open discussion. With this in mind, I will shortly go through a brief round of introductions of our panelists and then begin the discussion period. At any moment, I encourage any one of our attendees to share questions through the GoToPlatform's questions function right under the polls area. We will happily address live, and should we be unable to do that, we'll get back to you after the event with answers to your question. The webinar recording will also be made available on our YouTube channel, and a notification will be sent to you all once available. So that said, our first panelist, based in Spain, is Olatx Alvariño Garay. Olatx, I hope I'm saying your name right. She's a senior CRA who studied pharmacy at the University of Valencia in Spain. She conducted the 4th-year studies at the University of Reims, Champagne-Ardenne, that's in France, and pharmacist pre-registration training in Italy. She started her career working as a pharmacist in the United Kingdom and also worked as hospital pharmacist in the NHS system. After completing her master's degree in clinical research in Barcelona, Olatx got involved in different clinical trials from phases 2 to 4. including pediatrics, as well as rare disease studies. She has experience in ethics committee regulatory submissions in Spain, as well as contract negotiations in Italy and Spain, which is quite interesting. She's a certified CRA in Italy as well since November of 2011, and performed monitoring activities in a wide range of countries: Spain, Italy, United Kingdom, Germany, Sweden, and Switzerland. Olatx, thank you for joining. I really appreciate you being here, and I feel your input is going to be quite precious.
Thank you, Elias. Hello, everyone.
Wonderful. So our second panelist from Germany, Dr. Patrick Tomasch, clinical research consultant with a medical doctorate degree, very relevant, quite interesting. Long-term experience in clinical practice in anesthesiology, internal medicine, and radiation oncology. In the last 14 years, Dr. Tomasch has been involved in clinical studies in Germany, Austria, and a number of other European countries. He has experience across a wide range of therapeutic areas, such as cardiovascular, GI, oncology, neurology, hematology, amongst others. And his experience covers clinical operations, regulatory, medical affairs, and pharmacovigilance, which is another great subject. Thank you for joining, Dr. Tomasch. I appreciate that.
Thank you for having me here. Hello, everybody.
Wonderful. And moving on to our neighbors in Israel, quite half an hour flight from Cyprus, always enjoyable. Gili Amitai joining us. She's a senior CRA and clinical research consultant, 15 plus years of experience working with pharmaceutical and medical device companies, handling feasibility, qualification, contracting, budget negotiations, study conduct oversight from startup through closeout. So pretty much everything. Gili's experience spans across a wide range of therapeutic areas: oncology, ophthalmology, cardiovascular disease and infectious diseases, orthopedics, and many others. She has consulted companies on improving, optimizing, and maintaining high-quality work processes, and managed international research on how to prepare for different kinds of regulatory audits. So quite an interesting background. Thank you for joining, Gili. Appreciate it.
Hi. Hi, everybody.
Wonderful. So moving on to our last, but definitely not least, panelist from South Africa, Henriette De Beer. She's a senior CRA with a nursing degree, very valuable in clinical research, and a very diverse therapeutic area experience. She has been involved in clinical studies in South Africa, but also in a number of different countries in Africa, such as Botswana, Malawi, Uganda, Mozambique, Kenya, Tanzania, and Zambia. She has 20 years of knowledge and experience as a clinical research professional in the pharmaceutical device and CRO industries. And during the course of her career, Henriette has been very interested in neonatal ICU studies, and overall her experience spans across global drug development, medical affairs, pharmacovigilance, reg affairs, auditing, and quality assurance. She also has a proven track record in building, managing key opinion leader teams and medical teams within South Africa, from studies ranging from phase 1 to 4 and post-marketing. Henriette, really a pleasure having you. We've had a lot of exchanges, you and I, the last few months, and I believe your input and feedback today is going to be quite interesting.
Hi, everybody.
Excellent. So with a round of introductions done, we'll get right into the main discussion for today. All the attendees should be able to see my screen. And what we're going to go through essentially is just very general slides showing the different discussion items that we're going to go through today. It's going to be a verbal discussion with our panelists addressing the different discussion items. So that said, we'll start with you, Olatx, and what I wanted to do is essentially from all the panelists, get a country-by-country update and a brief summary of the situation regarding COVID-19 as well as its impact, because it has been diverse and it's quite interesting to hear it from people that were right in the middle of it. So Olatx, we'll start with you. We'll go through Dr. Tomasch, Gili, and Henriette afterwards.
Okay. So, well, in Spain, the recruitment for most of the studies, for not essential studies or oncology studies, was stopped during the pandemic. and most of the patients that were ongoing at the studies had to stop the visits as well, because the country was in alarm, and the non-essential visits to the hospitals were forbidden. So also the monitors, we were not allowed to go to the site for monitoring visits, and also the study coordinators didn't go to the site for working. So everyone was working from home. So this was a bit difficult mainly for the study coordinators, because in the hospitals that where the medical records are electronic, they couldn't access to the data, to the patient's data, in order to complete the CRF. So also for the monitors, because they couldn't go to the hospitals. Well, we had to do the monitoring visits remotely. Well, yeah, and also
That's always a challenge for sure when the hospital staff is unable to support the program. And Olatx, do correct me if I'm wrong, in Spain, there were approximately 27,000 deaths, sadly, due to the pandemic, and about 240,000 people infected over a population of close to 5 million, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
So that's quite an impact. And here in Europe, we actually follow the Spain situation quite closely, as it was quite alarming. And I actually have friends living in Spain, and they were having a lot of interrogation marks at a certain point regarding the situation in their country. But thank you for the update. It's actually going to be quite interesting to hear Patrick's summary of what was going on in Germany with regards to the pandemic, and then get back to you for the specific impact on the clinical research industry. So, Dr. Tomasch, how did things roll out in Germany with regards to the pandemic?
I think you meant initially just to speak about the general situation in the country.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
Well, the Robert Koch Institute.
Tomasch, can you hear us? I think I lost you for a couple of seconds.
Published some numbers. So the number of cases was about 109. Oh, sorry. So you. So the number of cases are published by Robert Koch Institute, and yeah, sorry, I probably clicked it twice. So they published the cases. So it's about 190,000 cases and less than 9,000 dead. Generally in the country, the economy, of course, was paralyzed. Schools closed, many businesses closed, and many bankruptcies are expected as in the following months. But Germany didn't take any direct strong measures. Initially, there were no masks. There was a rule to wear masks in stores from the 27th April. So it's just 5 weeks, so I don't know. It's end of April, 27th of April, when we had to start wearing masks in the store. But when the people leave the store, immediately put the mask, into the pocket. So you can imagine that this mask, and they reuse it again, so the mask can be contaminated. But anyway, we had different rules in different parts of the country. So in Bavaria, you were not supposed to meet other people in the public, only one person, but this person that lives with you in your own apartment or house. So basically nobody. In other parts of the country, you were allowed to meet one, but I don't know how strict that was, how people strictly follow these rules.
Germany was quite applauded throughout Europe for its very quick response, and
I don't know, because like in the Czech Republic, they had to wear masks on the street and everywhere, and here they were not even in the store. So till the 27th of April, you can go to the store, and there was everybody. So that was not really that strict. But the schools are still closed. I don't know now. They opened some schools, but schools and many businesses were closed, so I cannot go to the copy shop. They tell me if you have more than 50 pages, you have to leave it here. What is sometimes complicated if you do the submissions, because I don't want to leave it in their hands. It's not just one document. So the country was closed, but we didn't feel it directly unless you are, affected yourself or somebody from your family.
Gotcha. Thank you for that update, Dr. Tomasch. I think Israel is going to be closely aligned to Germany's attacks, let's say. So I'll ask the same question to Gili regarding an update on the state of the pandemic in Israel. Please let us know what's on your end, Gili.
So Israel had approximately 300 deaths due to the pandemic, and now we have about 19,000 infected over a population of 9 million. We were in quarantine for about 8 weeks. Everything was closed. We didn't allow to go out, but hospitals were open, of course, and people that were in a serious condition came to the hospital. And we just on the 27th of May, it was the start of the opening of Day of the Economy. And I must say that till now, 67% of the population are back to work as a normal. And we will see what will happen in the upcoming weeks, because there is a possibility for a second wave now.
Yeah, I understand you, because the same concern is felt pretty much around the world, but specifically in countries like Israel, Cyprus, Greece, that are just about to reopen their economies for tourism. There is a fear of a second wave or a spike in cases due to the influx of people coming from abroad. So let's see how that evolves, and thank you for the update, Gili. Henriette, how about you? How was the situation in South Africa? And give us a high-level summary, please.
Okay, so for South Africa, currently at the moment, South Africa was definitely affected. The government announced a hard lockdown in March, which was a level 5, where we completely were isolated from everybody. You had to stay in your home. You were only allowed to buy some food, and it was only one person allowed in the vehicle, in any vehicles. And you also had to wear your masks and sanitizers at the shop. And only a certain number of people, including the staff in the shop, were allowed in the in a certain shop, and only for buying some food. So it also like an alcohol ban. It was a very, very hard lockdown. So at the moment, what we have in South Africa is 1.172 million people that were tested all over in South Africa. With
1 per million tested. Okay, wow.
Yeah, because we're rolling out we currently rolling out to all everybody within South Africa to do testing, to isolate people, more in advance. And
yeah, that's breaking the infection chain, right?
That is correct, yes. So the number of cases is 67,334 patients being positive, tested positive. And I can say that our mortality rate at the moment is 55.1%.
So did I get that correct? Is that 0.051? Is that it?
The mortality rate is 5.1%.
So is that considered quite low?
Global, yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for the update, Henriette, and I look forward to you sharing your insights regarding how the lockdown was addressed from a monitoring standpoint and a study coordination standpoint. And Olatx touched on this briefly during her summary of the situation in Spain, how the clinical research industry was impacted. So we're going to go through that question now all together. So back to you, Olatx. Can you give us a few more details as to how the pandemic, which at this point we know was Spain was one of the hardest hit countries, how was the research industry impacted?
Yes, yes. As I said before, the recruitment in Spain for clinical trials was stopped at the instruction of the government across our sites in Spain. And well, in Spain, we have 70 regions plus 2 autonomous cities that can be governed a little bit different. But since the state of alarm was in place, everything was controlled by the central government. And they decided that everything had to be stopped. And the patients that were already enrolled in the study could perform the study visits, but only for essential trials. But for the other trials, most of the patients couldn't perform the visits, their study visits, or their study visits could be performed via telephone or video conference. So for the clinical trials, a lot of protocol deviations were performed. And also the monitors, we were not allowed to go to the sites for monitoring visits. And the study coordinators couldn't go to the sites. So they couldn't take the paper medical records, of course, with them at home. But they also couldn't log into the electronic medical records, because normally you can just log into the electronic medical records from the hospital's computer. So for this reason, they were not able to complete the CRF or to resolve the queries. And yes, sorry?
So that explains the protocol deviations and obviously the amount of work that you have to go through in order to mitigate all that.
Yes, yes.
Well, interesting.
Okay. Yes,
say that again.
Yes, the biological samples, for example, couldn't be shipped to the central laboratories because the frontiers were blocked. But for my study, which was ongoing at the time of the pandemic, it didn't matter a lot because the biological samples were not so urgent to analyze. And so the regulatory authorities in Spain, they created a new regulation for this pandemic time. And for example, they allowed to the patients to take larger stocks of investigational medication at home with them in order to avoid to have to return to the sites so often. And also the study nurses were also allowed to go to the patient home and conduct some of the assessments that doesn't require the principal investigator involvement. And also, as I said, the patients could perform the visits via telephone or remotely, but many protocol deviations had to be done because sometimes the patients couldn't do their laboratory tests.
That makes sense. And the byproduct of the pandemic, obviously, but glad to see that measures were taken quickly to not bypass, but manage these hurdles and difficulties. Thank you for the update and for the very thorough description, Olatx. I appreciate that. Dr. Tomasch, same question to you, but with regard to Germany.
Yeah, so I actually first like to return to generally the functioning of the hospitals that I didn't mention previously wasn't so limited, so that is actually already reported that that, for example, the number of heart attacks dropped by 25 or 30% in Germany. So basically, and in some other diseases, you know, the number of patients dropped by 40%. So really, parts of departments were limited or closed, and so it's expected that, you know, we have indirect victims of the situation that didn't come to the hospital because some of them were afraid or because it was closed. There are multiple reports about this from multiple sources. So generally, I think, you know, I cannot represent the whole industry here. I don't have this information from everybody. I'm just from few people, and my studies are mostly in the submission stage. So, but I think, you know, the sponsor CROs are reasonable, so they know when they have to, you know, normally during the normal situation, you remind, you know, the sites, we need more patients and recruitment, and in such a situation that they know what they can expect, so they do not even try to expect something that is not reasonable in this situation. So it's reasonable to follow up the patients that are already in the study, and you know, in case I can imagine, in case some oncological study, nobody would object, because those patients have to be treated. But generally, I think all the sponsors and CROs were reasonable in that. So they just try to follow up the patients, and even, for example, the situations that I know where the patient, you know, couldn't come because of the situation. So I checked with authorities because the competent authorities publish regularly like guidelines for the situations that all derive from European agency guidelines. So the drug, you know, the study medication is delivered to the patient. It's allowed to do this. So I arranged this situation, for example, but I said, you know, if everybody is reasonable, you can handle this situation, and you wait with starting new studies, you know, a couple weeks or months. But as I say, I don't have the information from everywhere. I just know from my colleagues that they monitored like 1 month ago. The first time that I've heard that somebody is monitoring. But you know, it's you know, there is individual approach from different clinics or clinic chains or clinics, different federal states in Germany. So
it sounds like it was common sense driven decisions, and BfArM, which is Germany's regulatory authority, elected to approach it with a rational and logic mindset. So that's quite interesting. Thank you for that, Dr. Tomasch. Gili, how about you in Israel? How was the clinical research industry impacted there?
Actually, quite similar as here in Israel. The home care was explored during the pandemic, but it was short duration of. So we need to check it. In home care scenario, the nurse goes to the house of the patient to conduct some activities in which visits that the PI is not involved. If it would be a second wave of COVID-19, we would look to use the home care visit scenario in order to, I think it will be much more common. And maybe even after the pandemic, this can be a good solution for, you know, when the hospital are very busy and the PI, so maybe it can be, some visit can be used by the home care. It sounds to be a good solution. And during the pandemic, the Ministry of Health, they proved to send, as mentioned here, study drug to the patient's house, but it was only in cases when the patient can take these drugs by themselves. Something else that happened here is that if new ICF should have been sent, so they could deliver some summary page or even a digital if a patient was in quarantine, and a proof of identity and document must have been done. So this is also something that they consider to be after the pandemic. And yeah, we will. And since last May, the MOH stopped all the drug shipment to houses, and now the patients must come to visit the facility. And that's it for now.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. So it looks like the effect was short term in Israel, and it was quite well managed with regards to progressing studies. That's always great. And MOH is known for responsiveness and use of technology, and we're going to discuss that later on as well as to what kinds of technologies were implemented and used. Moving on to South Africa, Henriette, on your end, how was the clinical research industry affected during the pandemic?
Okay, so during the hard lockdown, hospital sites and most commercial clinical research sites had to close down. The study operations were stopped, and the sites most affected were the ones in the hospital, whereas complete the opposite for the dedicated research facilities who actually continued seeing patients with special permits. So when they put on the level 5 hard lockdown, all the first frontline workers had to apply for special permits, and they could issue that permits to patients to visit the sites. So, and for studies that remained active, there were risks and some hurdles shipping samples overseas. But however, that was a foreseeable deviation, which we actually discussed with medical monitors up front. And we made a second plan where we had to send these samples to our local laboratory and send it over to the central lab in a blind fashion. So, and other initiatives were also to use home dosing for nursing home visits, and to inject some patients or subjects during the trial. And we made use of a centralized, specialized vendor so that the same standards were rolled out. And that's a minor amendment was sent to our regulatory authority and was easily or very quickly approved.
Excellent. That sounds quite exciting. And you also addressed indirectly, Henriette, the next subject of discussion, which is the continuity of work at the research sites, and if there was continuity, how it was handled, and if not, have they resumed operations? So it looks like from a timeline standpoint in Israel, operations are sort of back to almost normal. Germany, Dr. Tomasch, if you agree, appears to be the same thing now. There seems to be a certain restart of normal, between brackets, activities. And on your end, Olatx, given that Spain was very heavily affected in comparison with other countries in Europe, what are you seeing right now in terms of clinical research facilities working? And if they are working, how are they doing that? Are they back to normal, or are they still using measures for distancing and limitation of contact?
Well, we are not back to normal yet, but we are moving slowly. So for the clinical trials, the investigators are now allowed to recruit patients, and also they can start new clinical trials as well, rather than in COVID-19, of course. Well, in Spain, we are progressing different in each region, but most of the country are now in phase 3. Which means that everyone can go back to work, we can go out from home, bars and restaurants and hotels are open and we can use them, not with the full capacity, just like 50% of the capacity. So, okay. Yeah, for the sites it's the same. We are now allowed to go to monitoring visits, but we need to keep the safety measures, which means that probably we are not allowed to go to monitors at the same time, or we cannot be together, one monitor with the study coordinator using the same computer. So a lot of safety measures are being taken in place. And we are still in the state of alarm until the 21st of June. So I understand that after the 21st of June, the government will implement a new legislation about normality, the new normality, and they will describe, you know, how everything needs to be performed. So more and more, the normality will come back to Spain.
Excellent. So it's really a step-by-step process, and also more complicated because Spain is divided in different regions, let's say. So each one is progressing on a different pace, which is something that we come across in the United States of America as well, where each state is sort of assessing the situation on a standalone basis and trying to progress based on what they're seeing on the field. Thanks for that, Olatx, and for everyone's input. Moving on to the next matter of discussion is, I'd like to know what were the most common limitations regarding monitoring, and what were those limitations then, and moving forward, have you been informed of what kind of limitations are going to stay in place? Olatx just explained the distancing, as well as other options, but can you tell us a bit more, Olatx, and then we'll go over to Germany, about options that are available to CRAs with regards to monitoring visits, remote monitoring visits, and what have you seen on your end?
I don't have that much experience with that, but I don't see also too many options. It's just 1 or 0. It's either you go there or not. And the remote monitoring, there are some plans, but it might work somewhere, but there could be, in theory, remote monitoring if the site has the equipment for it, where they could allow, you know, the monitor to access the patient file without, you know, just the study patient, what normally they don't have this access. So in theory, this could exist, and also BfArM and the other competent authority in Germany issued in these instructions that you could monitor via camera. You're not allowed to scan, you know, to receive scanned documents, because they will be already in your home or your home office or outside. But you can watch the stream, even though you could, in theory, also save it, record it. But so there might be a way that somebody shows you, for example, the informed consent signature. But that would be very time consuming for the second person, for the study coordinator. So I don't know, it would rather be an exception than a rule for now.
Okay. So it appears there's still a few things up in the air. I'd like to get Henriette's perspective about this matter of what are the most common limitations regarding monitoring during the epidemic, Henriette, but also moving forward. Henriette, if you can hear me, you're self-muted, so we can't hear you. Right, I'll advise Henriette that she's muted in writing. But Olatx, how about you? Tell us about what the limitations during the epidemic and moving forward are, particularly with regards to Spain.
Well, yes, at the time of the pandemic, monitoring visits were not allowed on site. So for the ongoing studies, COVID-19 and non-COVID-19, it was allowed to do central monitoring, like reviewing the ECRF or IRT systems. And also the monitors could review the electronic records from the patients via video conferences, or sharing the pseudo-anonymized copies of the medical records with the monitor via platform or email. This was allowed by the European Medicines Agency. And well, I have been involved in a COVID-19 study in Italy, and all the monitoring visits I have performed with the sites were via video conference. So I couldn't view the name of the patient, so the name of the patient and personal details were hidden. But they were showing me all the medical records that I was requesting to them based on the risk-based monitoring activities. But for example, for another study that I am involved in, which is non-COVID study, my colleagues were doing the monitoring visits with the sites, but they were not reviewing the medical record. They were only helping the sites to resolve the queries, collecting essential documents, reviewing the adverse events or serious adverse events, and helping the sites to completing them, and that's it.
Wonderful, thank you. Henriette, back to you. Tell us a bit more about the limitations in South Africa.
Okay, so the biggest hurdle was getting to the sites. Traveling across the 9 regions of South Africa was not allowed in the level 5 lockdown. We're still under some limitations to travel under the lockdown level 3. And when the hard lockdown of level 5 was announced, I contacted study sponsors and regulators to advise them that the monitoring activities would be transferred to a remote monitoring model. So, and we were granted approval, and there were 2 levels of security as well to make sure that there were no patient identifiers, only the patient source, so we could continue with monitoring activities. And the SOPs were revised, so the site had to submit some SOPs so that we can comply with site regulations and ICH GCP and our regulatory authority. So these were very proactive measures that we had took place to continue with the privacy of the patient data. So the only thing that we couldn't review was the patient informed consent, because that had some patient identifiers. So, and the model that we've implemented were very effective. So, but I think that's the way to move forward. Doing remote monitoring, it will save some cost to sponsors as well.
That's always a welcome option, Henriette. Thank you. Gili, what about Israel? When we were talking, you told me that remote monitoring was already used in Israel even before the pandemic, and would be very interested to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, we use a lot of remote monitoring before, and probably during the pandemic we use more. It does not cover all the activity, but still there's a lot of advance. And during the pandemic in Israel, some of the hospital sites allowed monitor to come to visit. The hospitals were almost empty. There's a lot of private areas where monitor can stay and work, and it was only one monitor could come. But it was the monitoring, the CRA decision if you want to come or not. And if not, so visit call. They call and arrange to send out material for review, like some safety forms. Something else that nobody said here actually is that in Israel there is a label regulation. So the MOH give us some waiver, and we allowed to use the original label, just because, just that the patient will receive these drugs. And the patient, when they received the shipment of the IP, they had to approve this shipment, and they have to write that they got it. and the CRA should check it by the phone or send them the approval. That's it.
Quite interesting. It's good to see MOH showing the flexibility in order to keep study continuity. So staying with you, Gili, do you expect any new regulations or regulatory requirements from MOH in Israel or ethics committees to be announced as a byproduct of the pandemic?
The MOH in Israel consider really deeply to adapt the electronic signature. That's something that I didn't say, but we use electronic signature during the pandemic. They also consider about electronic ICF and of course the home care. We just got an email, and they would like us to give them a feedback about this idea. So I think they will consider that.
Wonderful. Good to see that more technology being implemented in order to facilitate and sort of streamline different processes. On to you in Germany, Dr. Tomasch. What do you expect Bee Farm to announce, if anything, with regards to changes on upcoming studies or new regulations?
I think they will follow what comes from the European agency and then adapt maybe some details for Germany. But what I already experienced is from ethics committees, because we usually have to submit printed documents, and sometimes you have like 7 copies of everything or 12 copies. So it's really like 10 kilograms of paper. So now I worked recently with 2 ethics committees. We have like 50, and so they adapted because of this situation to receive electronic files, even though it wasn't like a final solution, just like temporary solution for now, also from technical point, but it was very, very comfortable for me to submit. One of them, it was something like Dropbox, and the other one was just by email, but still I didn't have to print it out and send in and wait till they receive it, even if it's only 2 days usually. But so there might be progress in that, like in Austria, many ECs already have this electronic system for the submission. So hopefully this is the direction that development will go.
Hopefully, yeah, that would be great to see, again, in Germany as well, more technology implemented to facilitate the process. And for Spain, Olatx, do you anticipate Spain's regulatory agency to retain some of the guidelines and some of the directives that were given during the pandemic?
Yes, well, in Spain, the ILIKOS, which is the regulatory authorities, they issued a guideline on the 5th of May explaining all the procedures for the COVID-19 studies and non-COVID-19 studies during the pandemic. And well, in Spain, normally you need to submit electronically to both regulatory authorities and ethics committee at the same time. So this wasn't modified during the pandemic, but for COVID-19 studies, the approval, well, or the comments were very, very quickly. So they approved the COVID-19 studies if everything was okay very quickly. You didn't have to wait for like the meeting and then 30 days for the comments. And in Italy, where I have performed my COVID-19 study, normally you need to submit to all ethics committee involved in the study, and you need to receive the comments from all of them. And you need also to submit to the IFA, which is the regulatory authorities. During the pandemic, the regulatory authorities in Italy, they decided to create a national ethics committee for the whole country. So you should have to submit the study to this national ethics committee and to the IFA, which is the regulatory body. And
okay.
Yes, and the approval was very, very quickly for COVID-19 studies.
Wonderful. It's good to see that. And the same question for Henriette down in South Africa, and that's quite interesting because South Africa is dealing with a bit of a more, not to say more complex situation, but a number of different factors that could have an effect. So, Henriette, tell us about what SAHPRA may establish as a new guidance even after the pandemic.
Okay, so yeah, for SAHPRA, they established new guidance. So, for example, before any of the patients are enrolled to a study, they most probably will require that the patient needs to be tested for COVID-19 first, so that they can be excluded. So once they are tested positive, we might consider exclusion. This is very important for South Africa, given the history of our HIVs and the studies in infectious diseases. And to aid with the tracking measures, the track and trace system that we had that had been implemented for TB patients, given the high incidence of TB, was also being used in the same manner for the COVID-19 COVID-19 patients, to ensure participants are excluded and that proper care is given to all the subjects. So the same applies for South Africa for our SAHPRA. The normal turnaround time for submissions and approvals for standard protocols is anything between 60 and 90 days. But for COVID-19 studies, they had given us a 7 to 10 working day turnaround time, which I think is excellent.
Wonderful. That's really great to see as well, especially in a more complex situation like South Africa. And staying in South Africa with you, Henriette, can you give us your thoughts on the alternative monitoring strategies and the possibility of combining them to get an optimal result? So, remote monitoring, central monitoring, what have you seen work well in South Africa?
It is definitely the remote monitoring that was very well. So our sites were very, very, they were very cooperative in sharing those documentation after we had confirmed that we have 2 levels of security for those subjects. So it was really excellent. I think the cooperation and work together was more effective than doing it on site itself, because we had like Skype calls resolving issues, discuss. So there was a good interaction between the sites and the monitoring site.
Wonderful. Great to see that, again, people getting together to implement new approaches. I'm interested to get your perspectives, Dr. Tomasch. In Germany, it seems like you're leaning more towards the hybrid approach.
Yes, well, at least I think it's good to establish some relationship with the sites in the beginning of the study, like during the maybe qualification or initiation, and then of course you can work remotely, but it's much better to work with somebody that whom you already met, also from both sides when they know you. So I don't think that even if the technical, all technical conditions are ready for remote monitoring and remote studies, it's still you cannot replace that.
So you feel like the human contact still has a very significant importance, and a hybrid approach that would best serve the needs of a program.
Yeah. Because sometimes you are very brief in what you request, and generally, it's like in a company, in a virtual company, when you don't know these colleagues, you don't know the colleagues. Sometimes you receive just very short information or instruction, and sometimes it can feel insensitive. But when you know the person, it's completely different when you just imagine something. So generally, I think it's for any kind of business is good when we keep some
human contact.
Human interaction to some extent, and then you can use all the technology that we have when everything is ready, when the laws allow it, and when hospitals have, you know, the software that would allow that, because they need to separate you from the other information they are not from your patient or for your study. So some already have that, but most of them don't. So even if this is ready, still should have some contact. Otherwise, you know, it just brings you better results. And sometimes, you know, we are in competition with other studies, and as everything is in competition, because your attention is just to one thing at the time. So if they know you have already a little more attention than somebody. Or, you know,
when they know you in person, that people typically tend to appreciate you more and try and get your work pushed through. So I can definitely understand your perspective, Dr. Tomasch.
Then you can be brief also, and with messages and emails when you're already, you know, in some closer cooperation. Not in the beginning, you cannot just write one sentence, please replace that or something. But once you really already, you know, have repeated contact and multiple email a day, then you can write brief, you know, information. But otherwise, you know, it must be based on something.
Yeah, absolutely. I tend to agree with you, and I also very much like to have Gili's thoughts on alternative monitoring strategies. And Israel is recognized for being a leader in technology. So I'm interested to see what have you seen on your end, Gili, in terms of centralized monitoring, risk-based monitoring, remote monitoring.
I didn't have the opportunity to use centralized monitor or risk-based monitor, but there are studies that use it in Israel, and the data are only verified at high-risk sites. I personally using remote monitoring. In addition, of course, for the on-site visit, remote monitoring makes the visit much shorter, you know, and we are making a lot of work done before the visit. So you know, 1 day of remote monitoring is like 2-3 days of to come to visit at the site. So
it saves time as well.
And it's cheap to the sponsor, and I think it's good. You know, I found it very useful.
Absolutely, I agree with you 100%. And I think Olatx also agrees with the use of technology and has been using remote monitoring actively. Olatx, tell us about your experience with these technology-driven approaches.
Yes, as you said, in late March, April, and May, all my monitoring visits were remote using Microsoft Teams or Skype. So they were performed through video conferences with the sites, and it was very good because I could see the source data. The study coordinators or the investigators were sharing the medical records, hiding the patient's details with their computers or showing me the paper medical records. I have also visited the pharmacies. They made a virtual tour to the pharmacies, opening the refrigerators and showing the investigational products there. And also I have performed virtual tours of the laboratory, and I have checked the freezer where the laboratory samples were stored. And in the meantime, all the documents were collected via email. So the accountability logs, the essential documents like financial disclosures and temperature logs. So for me, it was good. But I think the best option for me will be combining the site monitoring visits from time to time and the remote monitoring visits in order to save time, energy, and money.
Wonderful. I agree with you as well. And I believe whoever you speak to in terms of whether they are sponsored or a CRO or a freelance CRA, I believe would agree with a hybrid approach being the most useful and effective way. And also, we have to keep in mind that although the possibilities and the technologies available for remote monitoring and many other types of monitoring, we do have to be mindful and sensitive to the capabilities of sites, particularly ones based in hospitals, to meet the requirement. So I'll start with you on this second to last matter of discussion before we close out. How are you approaching the hurdles in terms of implementation with sponsors in your region?
Well, it's a bit complicated because some of the hospitals, they are not allowed to download applications and they cannot log into different systems. But nowadays, I think, and also due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the hospitals know that their doctors need to use this platform, so they are granting access to these systems. And also the study team working at the hospital, they are not used to work this way, so they really need training. But I think if we train the sites, it will be a good way to work. Because yes, the European medical authorities allows for remote monitoring during the pandemic. They allows sharing the data via email or telephone or video conference. So it's great to do it this way in order to avoid traveling.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. I'd also like to get Gili's thoughts on the possibilities and the technology that is available for remote monitoring, especially when it comes to Israel. As we mentioned earlier, Gili, Israel is recognized for being a leader in technology, but tell us how are the sites welcoming these new technologies when you approach them, and how are sponsors dealing with this?
In Israel, there's a lot of ideas regarding new technology, but the platforms in the hospital are a little bit poor due to the budget limitation.
Yeah.
You know, something interesting that I see during the COVID-19 is there's a lot of startups started to develop devices in order to, you know, to help with remote testing, and it was really nice to see that. But I hope that the hospital will be able to use it. There is a gap between the technology and the hospital, you know. But okay, actually there is also a lot of issue around the privacy in Israel. It take care in two levels. One is an national level, that the hospital categories are an essential resource, and then they are belong to the national cyber regulation, mainly against outside attack. There is a lot of trying to attack during, you know, the pandemic. And the second level is the privacy of the patient, okay, to avoid the entry. So it's like
unauthorized use of data, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's always very important, and I know it's also extremely important in Europe with GDPR and a number of other regulations. Same thing in North America. So definitely a very important matter to keep in mind. And going on to South Africa with regards to possibilities and technology, question 7 on your end, Henriette. How are you approaching these hurdles with sponsors in your region? And how is South Africa welcoming new technologies and new platforms?
Okay, so yeah, South Africa has welcomed new technologies and new platforms as part of the effort to grow clinical research and bring promising therapies to patients in South Africa. In my experience, research sites in South Africa are very compliant and very receptive to new teachings. So sponsors have asked me to work closely with them on monitoring plan development or adjustments. And then I was also asked to inform the sites about levels of security associated to the transmittal of private patient info. And that was really not none of the site staff doubt in any at any second, because they knew where we were sitting at with the pandemic, and they were again, they were very, very cooperative.
That's really wonderful. And I believe as an emerging region, this is really encouraging for South Africa. There's so much potential and so much value to bring studies and opportunities to South Africa for promising new medications. So I'm really happy to hear that. Patrick, I'd like to hear from you as the last panelist regarding this technology matter. I know you have a very logical opinion about it. Can you tell us a bit of your thoughts, or share with us how do you feel sites in Germany are going to welcome new technologies?
Well, you know, generally the technology, we have smartphones more than 10 years. We have internet available to everybody more than 20 years or so. The technology is here, and we don't need any new programming language to program such as simple applications. But the legislature and generally the hospitals do not buy the software that often. You know, they have some cycles, and first, you know, it's a big change that has to come from several sides, and it was mentioned, the privacy was mentioned. So I think they wouldn't allow to monitor from outside of EC. I read something like that from B Farm, and generally they probably at the time when they bought those hospital systems, nobody put a condition or feature that it must be available for remote monitoring. They usually consider that they monitor from the hospital, and generally there are many hospitals that limit the internet communication for everybody. So I even had hospitals where they don't even allow you to send Word documents. So when we negotiated contracts, you had to use PDFs, and they printed the PDF file and put comments on it, either written, or there are these tools in PDF programs where you can put. So they were not allowed to send any documents. So it's sometimes quite complicated, and some of the hospitals don't even have normal PCs. They have like such a terminals, like a net PC, but it's basically very limited. Even some don't even have USB drives intentionally. So there are many limitations, and so I don't know where will the trend start. Maybe in some smaller country that is more flexible, and then they would see where the development goes. I have no idea.
So to be determined, but it appears that again, another situation where it has to be a case-by-case approach, and there has to be many different stakeholders pulling their weight in order to promote the arrival of all these new technologies and options and softwares. So as a last matter of discussion, something a bit more specific in terms of your activities. I'll start with you, Dr. Tomasch. Were you involved in a COVID-19 study, and generally how's the interest for studies involving those patients in Germany?
What was the, sorry, I couldn't understand the last sentence. What is the interest?
Yeah, are you seeing a lot of new studies being, you may not be privy to the information, but generally speaking, is Germany receiving a lot of requests for studies in COVID-19 patients to be approved?
Yeah, I think, I don't remember the number, but I think they publish even those numbers. But yeah, I have submitted one study, and so generally the competent authorities, not only in Germany, they have a priority, you know, they award you priority approach or access to submission, and process it faster, and you know, so they definitely want to contribute to some treatment development. So there's a priority in that, and I probably there even you don't even have to pay some fees, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But I don't think it's critical for this. It's just symbolically that they support the research, especially in this current critical area. And I don't know what else. As I mentioned, generally some of the is allowed to submit electronically, so that's generally good. And
absolutely, quicker and easier on you guys that are involved in the day-to-day. I hope the study you're involved in goes well, and obviously any positive data.
Yeah. So you ask about the number of patients, or just general interest in the studies?
Just general interest. At this point, going into the patient aspect would be less relevant. But it's good to see that a lot of countries are opening up and finding ways to streamline the approval process for COVID-19 studies to start and essentially help save lives in some ways. And speaking of COVID-19 studies in a country that was heavily affected, Spain as well as Italy. Olatx, I know you told me you were involved very closely in a study. Would you be so kind to give us a bit more information about your involvement?
Yes, I have been involved in a study in Italy, in a COVID-19 study that started the 14th of March, sorry. So my role was monitoring, because the regulatory component was performed by the sponsor because it was straightforward. And I have performed remote monitoring visits for the whole study. And at the beginning, it was very difficult because also we have performed the site initiation visit over the phone, and it was difficult to find out how the sites were organized. But at the end of the day, because I had to speak with the sites every week and doing video conferences, and I was involved a lot with the sites, the monitoring visits at the end were good. And in Spain, on the 12th of June, they are 94 COVID-19 clinical trials running and 292 observational studies.
Wow, that's really impressive, and what a contribution from Spain in a time where it's quite difficult to even get out of the house to initiate so many studies and bring together the scientific community in support of this pandemic. And thank you for your contribution as well. Olatx, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Gili, on your end, in Israel, have you been involved in a COVID-19 study? And generally speaking, have there been any studies initiated in Israel with regards to this particular patient profile virus?
I personally was not involved in COVID-19, but in Israel there is, we are a small country, but there is 25 studies now in COVID-19, and we hope, that's, we will get some solution for that pandemic.
It's going to be a team effort. Yeah, it's going to be a team effort, and any contribution from countries that have the resources, the expertise, and the access to the patient profile is going to be invaluable. Henriette, how about you in South Africa? Have you been involved in a COVID-19 study, and how's the general situation in terms of studies in South Africa in this patient profile?
Currently, there are, I know, I've just seen the web, so there are currently 10 studies in South Africa, and I'm just starting with one of the new COVID-19 studies.
Wow.
So what actually happened as well is that our sites had to have COVID-19 SOPs. For like emergency plans, if a patient is tested positive or in direct contact with a client or contamination, a huge contamination, they had to adapt their SOPs. So with our emergency plans, it has to be had one entrance and one exit. I know I know it might be common knowledge to everybody, but for a site to restructure the process was quite challenging, you know, to comply with that regulations.
Wow, quite interesting that, and of course, all the initiatives that are introduced to upkeep safety and control in case of an infection are great, but they definitely take a lot of work in the background in order to implement correctly within a regulated research setting. So that's interesting, Henriette, and thank you for all your hard work in supporting sponsors as well as sites in your region to get all this done. I really appreciate it as well.
It's our honor.
Wonderful. So with that response, we have concluded our discussion and covered the topics that we had planned. I do apologize to the panelists as well as the attendees for running about 20 minutes late. I do not see any questions coming through, so we will conclude the webinar at this time. I want to thank all the attendees and give a big thank you to you, Olatx, to you, Dr. Tomasch, to you, Gili, and you, and Henriette, for your support and your precious input. As mentioned earlier, the webinar recording will be made available on our YouTube channel, and we will send a notification to everyone who registered to go and check that out. We will also remain available and share our contact information should there be any project-specific questions or any other matters to discuss with any one of us. So with that, thanks everyone. Really appreciate it. Have a good rest of the day and a good day for those in North America.
Thank you, Elias.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Elias. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
You, Elias.
You're welcome.